Da, da. Hello again. Glad to be back. Turn this music down. Strange, isn't it? How one man's life touches so many lives, and when he isn't around, he leaves an awfully big hole. That is my favorite movie quote. Does anybody know what that's from? If you do, I'll buy you a drink tonight if you can drink. Strange, isn't it, how one man's life touches so many other men's lives, and when he isn't around, he leaves an awfully big hole. Yes. Yes, it is from It's a Wonderful Life. That's what Clarence says to George Bailey, and it's one of my favorite quotes because on countless occasions, it has been my anchor. It has been what reminded me that I exist for a reason, that my life matters, and that I am connected with everybody, right? That we're all interconnected, and that my presence, whether I think it or not, whether I feel it or not, does impact everybody around me, even the individuals I don't think it impacts, right? So let's go back in time, because the very earliest I can remember, like not physically, like mentally see this image of myself and step back into my shoes there, was this time when I was out camping. I was out camping with some friends, and we were on a walk, and we were just hanging out as friends, chatting, having a good time. It was dark out. I remember passing by, I remember the trees around me on the trail, and I remember noticing my shoe had come untied. And I knelt down to tie it, and while I did that, everybody kept going. And they kept laughing, and they kept going, and they kept joking, and nobody said, "Hey, Andrew's tying his shoe. Stop. Hang on for Andrew. Wait a sec. Hey, hurry up. Catch up with us." Whatever, right? And in that moment, I remember feeling this intense feeling, and I want to emphasize, while I share this story with you, the word feeling. Hang on to this thought. Notice when I mention it, because I'm going to talk about your feelings a little later on and help make some important distinctions that are worth knowing. But anyway, I remember feeling incredibly alone, incredibly abandoned. I remember feeling rejected. I remember sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I thought these were my friends, and they don't even notice that they just ditched me in the dark, and I'm all by myself. And that was the very earliest time that I can recall really feeling that aloneness, that separation. And it's been something that's led me down the journey that I've had to go down. But that was what I always battled with, was this feeling of loneness. And the aloneness brought me to places of anxiety, overthinking situations, and it got even worse. It brought me to places of depression. I felt very separate from people, very, like I said, abandoned. But most of all, I felt that there was not any love present. I felt an immense lack of love in my life. I began experiencing periods of doubt, where I doubted my own worth, where I doubted whether I was really needed, whether my existence mattered. And that brought me to the biggest challenge that I've faced for years of my life, my entire life as far back as I can remember it. It's something that up until 2 years ago, nobody knew about, and up until a year ago, there was only 3 people who knew about it in my life. I don't even think Daniel knows this, but I have spent the greater part of my life, I don't like that, turn it off, the greater part of my life struggling with suicide. I believed that I didn't want to exist, that I didn't need to exist, that there was no point to it. And most of all, I believed that it would be better to end my life than to experience the pain of the lack of love that I believed I was feeling, the pain of the aloneness, and all the other pains I was experiencing, the weight of depression, the weight of anxiety, the weight of constantly overthinking problems. Um, you know, as a man thinks, so he is a very common saying. And that became my reality. I spent so much time consumed in my thoughts, consumed in taking things the wrong way most of the time, that I would overthink situations. It would build anxiety. It would build depression. I would really let those feelings continue to grow inside me, and then it would go even further. And again, like I mentioned earlier, it would bring me to a place where I thought, this is so great, I don't want to bear it, right? And I'm grateful for a lot of the lessons I'd known up to that point, because those were lessons that had saved me. Things like knowing that that pain is temporary, right? That every experience in your life is temporary, right? Every moment continues to go by. Knowing that, man, there was a big one that I was just thinking of. Just having a belief from very early on that I did exist for a reason, and I had to trust in that. I had to have faith that there was something bigger than me that knew, where I was going, even on days I didn't feel like I knew where I was going. And so that was, for me, a lot of times what kept it together. But it didn't matter, because I still spent immense amounts of time in this miserable place. It was incredibly miserable. And it got worse, because what you focus on becomes your reality. And there's a law of exponential growth, right? Just like if you invest money in something, there's a snowball effect. The same thing works for any negative experience in your life. Also for positive experiences, right? But if you focus on the negative things in your life, you'll notice they grow. And they grow exponentially, right? They grow like the snowball going down the hill, and it gets bigger and bigger and faster and harder to stop. And it builds momentum, and it becomes scarier, and you lose, or you feel a loss of, whether you actually lose it or not, because Daniel made a great point with his own topic on understanding the control you have in your own life. But you feel like you lose control the more and more that grows exponentially, especially in that bad direction. I remember at one point, there was a time in my life where I was working on a ship in Boston, right? I was there for several years, and it was tough, because you would go out to sea for several months, and you would not have communication with anybody but the people on your boat. And the people on my boat were very, very miserable people. Most of them didn't take care of themselves. They didn't eat well. They didn't exercise. They lounged around in their spare time. And just like the truth that exists in you're the sum of the 5 people you hang around with, it was hard not to let that rub off on me, right? And then on top of that, a lot of times it would be a rough environment where people would pick on each other for fun, right? And, well, given my situation, what was a jest to some people only reinforced the beliefs that existed in my mind, right? So, when people acted a certain way or did anything that excluded me or made fun of me in front of a group of people, all that did was continue to solidify the belief I had in my mind that I didn't want to exist. It furthered my desire to take my life. I remember one night, I was all by myself on watch. It was the middle of the night. The sea was raging. It was freaking cold out. And I'm doing a lap of a security round, making sure everything looks good, walking across the deck of the ship in the dark, stormy, rocking all over the place, right? And I thought to myself, if I fell off this boat, I don't think anybody would notice. I don't think anybody would notice. They would think I was still on my round. They wouldn't be worried. They would probably get angry first, and they'd radio me, and they'd be like, hey, where are you? What are you doing? You're supposed to be in here, putting log entries in, saying that you can confirm that the ship is in good condition. Right? Their first response would be anger. They wouldn't believe I'd actually fallen overboard. They wouldn't look for me, right? And so I remember thinking that, and I remember thinking, and I do believe in this circumstance that I'd had a particularly lousy day. But again, it was the belief that I was alone, that I didn't matter, that nobody, especially in the close area, anybody on board that ship, cared about me at all, right? And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, I could hang myself from the mast of the ship, and I don't think anybody would give a shit. No more than the shit they're required to give when they say, hey, your son passed away while he was active duty. There you go. I was like, I don't think anybody on this boat would actually mourn for me, right? And that only helped further that belief inside of myself that my life didn't matter. I remember there was one particularly scary day where I was really in my head. I was really depressed. I was really in my feelings, and I was letting them consume me. And so I decided that the best thing to do was to take a walk, get some air, take some space. And at that time, I was living in Alaska, and I hiked alone, and there are bears. And so I would take a gun with me, and I would carry my pistol on my hip just in case, because, well, I guess that's kind of ironic that I was worried about getting mauled by a bear, given the circumstance. But anyway, right, I was having a really lousy week. I remember being really depressed, and I go for this walk, and I remember feeling incredibly afraid because it dawned on me. I had this moment of consciousness where I realized that I had a loaded gun on my hip with a round chambered, and all I had to do was point it at myself and pull the trigger, and everything was over. It was done. And I remember feeling as afraid as I did because I wasn't sure I had the self-control to not do something as stupid as that. I realized that I was in such a bad place that I might actually do something as dumb as take my own life. And like I said, thank God I had a deeper belief that that was stupid, that suicide wasn't the answer, but I still felt that way. I still thought about taking a gun off my hip and taking my own life in the middle of the woods where nobody would find me. Honestly, if you'd popped a round off, you could probably pop a dozen rounds off in Alaska and nobody would have cared. They'd have been like, whatever, someone's just out having fun. The Wild West out there. But yeah, so that was my reality for the longest time. I remember the first person I ever told, I only told it to, not because I wanted to, but because I had an ulterior motive. In his story, Daniel was sharing about the attachment that he had. He was seeking one thing from his relationship, and he knew he had to get rid of his relationship because he was seeking things that weren't good, right? And so the same thing. I ended up sharing that with someone because I wanted to keep the good feelings that I got from the relationship I had with that person, right? And so I wanted them to be able to connect with me on a deeper level. But that was the first time I'd ever told someone. And a couple years later, not even a couple years later, after I realized just how bad it was and that the truth really needed to come out and that there was a lot of things going on behind the scenes that I hadn't been aware of, I decided it was important to share this with my parents, that I had been struggling with this for as long as I had been, and that a lot of it had been the way I perceived, right? Because again, with the environments, we're put into a situation as children where we don't have a lot of control about who's around us. We just learn from those environments. And the environment I had growing up, for whatever reason, I adopted a belief that people treated me the way they did because I didn't have any value, right? The way I experienced being treated by people was my own perception of it, whether it was accurate or not. But the truth is that had led me to where I was. So, there was a time where, like I said, only 3 people actually knew that I was contemplating ending my life. And I understood that a lot of those feelings had come from my childhood, the way I'd grown up, the way I perceived things, the way people had treated me, or the way I thought people had treated me, and the way people consistently continued to treat me. A couple of important things worth sharing. The first one was that So I heard this, the first time I heard this was with a group of other men. And this guy goes, you know, the real healing begins when you take something and you put it out in the light. That's when the growth begins. That's when the healing begins. That's when, that's when the plant grows. That's when the truth is revealed. You talk about bringing the truth to the light. That's kind of what happens in confession, to be honest. That's why confession is as healing as it is because you take something that's personal and you share it and you put it out in the world to be taken as it has to be taken, and to be seen from a different light, because a lot of times we only see it from our perspective, and our perspective isn't actually accurate. But anyway, so there was, where did my turnaround point come for this? Because like I mentioned, I literally lived like this for years. I would be anxious. I would be incredibly depressed. I would lack motivation. Thank God the only thing I did consistently was go to the gym. That's what I knew how to do on my very worst days. That was also in its own way the anchor I held to was, if you don't have the motivation to do anything else, you got to show up to the gym, because that's going to take your mind off things in a good way, right? So it became my outlet. And fortunately, I had a healthy outlet, unlike a lot of people who they find outlets in other things like alcohol or drugs or relationships or whatever. Not to say that a good outlet couldn't become a bad outlet and vice versa, but I remember how long I wondered I was going to struggle with this, and about a year ago, I had what I would call an epiphany. I actually had two epiphanies that changed my perspective. I understood a lot of important things. I'd been doing a lot of work in the last few years, still am, on understanding psychology, understanding biology, understanding human relationships, understanding how men think and act and what motivates men, understanding how women think and act and what motivates women, and what each of the sexes want and how they relate to each other in life. And so I'd been doing a lot of work on that, and there was a lot of things I knew, but I didn't believe, and I was really struggling to accept them as the truth or to incorporate them in my own life. And I remember reading a book by Wayne Dyer, and there was something he said that just clicked, and I reached a point that ironically I hadn't ever reached before, but for the first time in my life, I was actually okay with death, however it came, as long as it wasn't by my own hand. As long as it wasn't something I had done, I was 100% okay with my life being taken from me. I remember this beautiful feeling of just complete and utter surrender to my lack of control over events in my life. Things I couldn't change. I couldn't change the way people were. I couldn't change the way people thought about me. I couldn't change the way people drive. I couldn't change anything else. And if it was my time to go, it was my time to go. And like I said, that was ironic because there's one half of me trying to throw my life away and fighting that, and trying to convince myself it's worth something. And then now there's another half of me that is okay with God's plan, as I would call it, taking my life from me how He sees fit. That was the first epiphany, and it was incredibly freeing. The second one was I was doing some reflecting about sharing what I'd shared with people, and opening up about the desire to commit suicide. And one of the things I realized with all the work I'd done on understanding the male brain and the female brain and all the inner workings of the human beings, was that there's certain things that men look for in a relationship, and there's certain things that women look for in a relationship. And it occurred to me, I do believe love conquers all. I believe there's no more powerful power, if you could say it, in the universe than love. But there's always other factors that are included. And one of those factors is the fact that women look for men to fulfill a certain role. They look for men to provide, they look for men to protect. I think those are the two biggest out of the many things women want out of men. We all know women want a lot out of men. But they look for those first and foremost. And regardless of how much a woman loves you, I had this epiphany where I said, as long as I continue to let some part of myself desire to take my own life, no matter how much any woman loves me, there will be a part of her that will not be able to completely trust me because she doesn't know, just like when women want men to invest in them because, for example, pregnancy is a long road. It's 9 months. They don't want to have to bear your child if you're going to, hit that and run, because now they're stuck for 9 months and 18 years and the rest of their lives. They want to make sure that you're there for the long haul too. So the same thing occurred to me. I said, how can a woman truly and completely give herself to me if she knows I might not be there? Even the smallest part of me might choose not to be there for the rest of her life because I might choose a stupid thing like ending my own life. And that's what did it for me. That possibly because I hold relationships to such a high value. I want to one day share my life with someone else and be able to have a family and to be able to do all these other things and to serve them and to help them grow and to have them help me grow and all those other things. And because that was so important to me, I realized I have to give something up. I have to sacrifice something. And this is one of the biggest things currently that's holding me back from having the best possible relationship that I could allow myself to have. I can't exist as someone who my partner in the future might possibly have to worry that I would be gone at some point because one day I get too depressed and decide life's too much to handle and I want out. I mean, no matter how much I love any of my friends, if I knew that was the case, would I invest in them? It's tough. It's tough. Even if you think you would, it's still a challenge because nobody wants to get left high and dry, especially not myself. I've been experiencing that for forever. But that was what did the trick. I realized as long as I really valued having a relationship, a genuinely deep, loving, trusting relationship later in my life, and I wanted to become the best version of myself for that, I could not let this exist in my life anymore. And I decided I wouldn't. It was as easy as flipping a switch. I said, you know what? I'm done. I'll never permit thoughts like this to exist in my mind anymore. And if I do, if I think, wow, geez, the easy option in the midst of all these struggles would just be to take my life, I'm like, get out of here. Get out of here. Your train's already gone. Hit the road, Jack. Because it doesn't serve me, and it never did serve me. And I can look back and I can acknowledge it never served me, right? But I want to hop back to emotions because that was, gosh, those stinking emotions. Everybody's got them. We wake up in the morning and we don't feel like getting out of bed, right? We feel like staying in bed, even though there's stuff that has to be done. But we don't care because we feel tired. We feel lazy. We feel like we would rather just be served breakfast in bed and stay in bed all day, and maybe we'll roll out of bed to press play on the DVD player. People get angry at us, and we feel like that's not fair. We feel this, we feel that. But you know what? Emotions don't always matter because they're not always right? And so there's a couple of big points I want to make with this. The first is that just because you don't feel like getting out of bed doesn't mean you don't have a job to do. Someone's expecting you to show up somewhere in life, right? Maybe it's your boss at work. Maybe it's your family, and they're expecting you to help get the kids ready for school. Maybe it's your friends. Maybe it's just yourself. But someone, even if it's just yourself, is expecting you to show up. And that's why your feelings aren't always relevant, because there's something more important. And that's the second point I want to make is feelings need to be prioritized. They should be acknowledged, right? You might feel a certain way. It's important to recognize and say, I'm experiencing this, whatever's happening here right now as this. I don't know why this is making me sad, but it's making me sad. When you experience it like that, you're able to look at it and say, well, what is causing this in me? Is there something I can work on? Is there something I can improve? Is this person having a bad day and I can improve it? So they're important to recognize and acknowledge, but a lot of times they don't always matter, right? A lot of times there's something more important, and that's why I want to emphasize prioritizing your feelings. Because just like with getting out of bed, it's more important that you show up to work than that you feel like staying in bed, right? I think we could all agree on that. And so we have to realize that we can feel things, but we can't always let our feelings come first and foremost and stay on top, because that doesn't get us anywhere in life. That didn't get me anywhere in life when I felt depressed or anxious and was overthinking things and decided that the best solution, as ridiculous as this is to opt for the out and get out of here and just ditch all my problems. Right? That's what a waste, what an irrelevant feeling I should have seen that as. But again, you can still acknowledge it exists. You can still say, hey, this is affecting me this way. Why am I feeling this situation this way? Why is it causing this kind of response from me? What do I need to become aware of? What do I need to learn from this? What part of me is responding this way, and how do I make that part of me better so it doesn't misperceive things? And that's it, because a lot of it is perspective. A lot of times we feel a certain way, and it's just not a reality. It's, you get a text from someone, or you don't get a text from someone. That's even better. You text your girlfriend, for example, and you say, baby, I love you, and you don't hear back from her for hours. And you're like, what? She always texts me back. Does she not love me? Right? And you're feeling unloved. That's ridiculous. You know your girlfriend loves you. Why are you wasting time in worry, letting it, manipulate your mind into overthinking, into anxiety, into depression, when really it turns out she was busy, she just couldn't text you back, or she read it and totally got distracted because her mother, who she never talks to, called her, right? God knows what the reason is, right? But a lot of times our feelings, it's important to notice we responded that way, but it's not important to sit there and to completely feel that out, because it's not true. We feel like that person doesn't love us, but that's not at all the reality a lot of times. We just perceived it incorrectly. So that's one of the biggest mistakes I made throughout most of my life, is I would feel something and I would just hop into that mud puddle and just soak in it and just bathe in it, and it made the greater portion of my life hell at times, absolute and complete hell. It made me want to completely throw away the greatest gift that I have. So, what are you able to take from this? Well, a couple of things, hopefully. One is that we have to be careful not to let our thinking dominate our lives, because as a man thinks, so he is, right? And so if you're not careful about what you're thinking about and what you're feeling, and you get caught up in it, and you take it too personally or too literally, because we're very good at that as human beings. We do take things very personally, and we do take things very literally. We say, I'm feeling sad, I must be sad, done. Wow, that really served you. That really made your day better, I bet. Doesn't, right? So why do that? There's a message that I heard a few months ago that Andrew Tate put out there on depression. And I appreciated it. Well, let me share another short story before I talk about that. I remember just over a year ago, I attended an event, and I was listening to some people tell their stories. And this one man is telling his story about how he was in school as a little boy, and on Valentine's Day, they were giving cards to each other. And so he has to make all these cards and come into school and give them out, and the same goes for all the students. And they give out their cards, and there's only one on his desk. And it was from his teacher. And I remember that hit me so deep, He was talking about his own story of feeling alone and abandoned and unloved. That hit me so deep that I had tears rolling down my eyes right there, and I was doing everything I could to hide it. But I remember how similar that felt. I said, I know just how that feels. I know just how it feels to have the feeling that nobody cares enough to even write you a fake letter on Valentine's Day. And even more than that, I had made the mistake of convincing myself that because nobody had given me a letter, that was the truth. And that's what I wanted to say about depression is I heard this message a few months ago from Andrew Tate. I don't know if you're familiar with him, right? But he said depression isn't real. He said, you will feel depressed. He said, sometimes I feel depressed. Sometimes I feel depressed, right? But that doesn't make depression real. You make depression real because you let it exist in your life. And you tell yourself, going back to this telling ourselves stories, whether they're good or bad stories, you tell yourself, I'm depressed. And then you just sit there like a doctor, like I did, and you diagnose yourself. And well, gosh, once you're diagnosed, if you don't just sell that to yourself and the whole world, yeah, the doctor told me I got cancer. Now I got to do all this. I got to do A, B, C, and D. I need medical treatment. I need this. I need that. Right? So a lot of times we take what we feel and we build a story around it and we create our own reality. We just say, you know what? This is a great big pile of shit. Let me just make it part of my life because I feel that way, But that's all we're doing is we're taking something that we don't have to allow into our lives, and we do just that. We self-diagnose ourselves, or we let others diagnose ourselves. Well, you're just depressed. You'll be over it in a few months. God, can you imagine spending a few months? Can you imagine, like me, spending a few years depressed? Not a few years, most of your life depressed? What a waste of time, right? So don't let other people tell you what's wrong with you, and don't let yourself fool yourself into telling you that there is something wrong with you. Yes, there's always areas to improve. I know I've got lots of places to improve and grow and develop in, right? But I know the areas I don't need to let into my life, and one of them is depression. I know I can feel down. I know sometimes I can get down to the dumps. A couple weekends ago, literally just that happened. I started the morning and something went wrong, and man, that's frustrating. That's irritating. That makes my life hard. That's where it starts usually. Then something else happened, and then I go to do something, and something broke while I was trying to make a sale on something, and I was like, that's just what I needed, right? Now I look like this kind of person because I'm trying to sell a dud, right? And the thing I noticed almost instantly afterwards was that it was getting me down, right? And I said, this doesn't have to get me down. This is irrelevant. That happened. It's gone. Pish posh. Move on. I don't have to respond to it this way. I don't have to react to it this way. I acknowledge that it makes me bummed out because it didn't work out the way I wanted to, because it wasn't as in my control as I hoped it was. But I certainly don't have to spend the rest of my afternoon depressed about it. And I certainly am not going to go along with a lousy story of telling myself that I am a depressed person. Not anymore. That's gone. Screw that. Thank God for all the stuff I've learned, and for the people out there like Andrew Tate who are willing to tell you that you don't have to be these types of people if you don't want to be. You don't have to be anxious or depressed because it's all in your head most of the time. So I want to go back to where I started from with the quote from It's a Wonderful Life. Apparently I owe Daniel a drink at this point. But it was an anchor to me, right? And sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes you do have to find your anchors where you can to keep you alive until you can improve things, right? Sometimes you can't improve your situation immediately. Sometimes you're not ready to improve your situation immediately. Sometimes you're not at a point of acceptance or understanding where you're actually able to do something more than just live it and accept it and work through it. Sometimes you just need that anchor, right? But, when Clarence says to George that favorite quote of mine, strange, isn't it, how the life of one man touches so many other lives, and the awfully large hole he leaves when he isn't around, that, just like all the other beautiful material out there, served as my lifeline, but it also served as a reminder that we're all connected in some way or another, whether it's, and it's deeper than the shallow connection, that, oh, we have similar interests, most of us, everybody's got some sort of interest. I like driving from point A to point B, if over walking most of the time. I think we probably all have that in common. If we had to get from here to Boston, I bet we'd all take a car. Guess we got that in common. But it's deeper than that. It's spiritual. It's and you can see it in your own life if you look. I've had instances where someone's crossed my mind, and only seconds after they crossed my mind, even though we haven't spoken in ages, they'll text me, and I'll be like, there is a connection, and there is a spiritual connection, and it exists, because just like the teaching, I believe that we're all created in the image and likeness of God, and we're all divine human beings, right? That's the connection. That's the connection that Catholicism teaches you, is that we're all divine human beings, right? So there's how we're all connected, divinely connected, spiritually connected, right? And some other people have their own beliefs, but regardless of what your beliefs are, we are all connected. We all impact each other. And we're going to talk about this later, so I don't want to go too deep into it, but I really want to emphasize the awfully big hole that you leave when you don't show up. And whether that means taking your own life and opting out to fill your responsibilities in life, or something else, we do leave a hole when we're not here, when we're not present, when we're not performing, when we're not showing up as our authentic and true selves that the world needs us to be and that we were meant to be.